My name is Daniel Fanning, and I served a year in Iraq and Kuwait with the 1158th Transportation Company of the Wisconsin Army National Guard. I served from December 2004 through January 2006. I'm currently living and completing my graduate studies in Duluth, Minnesota, and I'm proud to be here with the Minnesota chapter of IVAW. Like so many others did, we talked about this past weekend. I enlisted right after September 11, 2001, out of a sense of duty and patriotism and wanting to somehow help and protect the country. I used to live in New York, and like many of you here, I know I took it very personally. Like many others have said, I'm necessarily against all wars all the time. It's just dumb wars, and I think most wars are dumb, and I think this war in Iraq is the dumbest one yet. I began hearing the grumblings of Iraq while we were actually wrapping up with our AT, my second year in the military. And I immediately had questions, like I know a lot of you did as well, but you don't necessarily buy into it, but at least you're hesitant to completely dismiss what your president's saying and what your commanders are saying. So you go in, and when we got activated, although a lot of us had questions, we did what we were told. But having served a year overseas, it only really solidified my fears and my thoughts of what I thought was going on over there, and it really made me 100% confident that the fears and the questions that I had were accurate, and in fact, maybe it was even worse than I anticipated. The fact is, what I saw was progress wasn't being made at all, and in the few places that it was being made, it simply wasn't worth the cost that we were paying to make it. Looking at it from like an economic point of view, the cost-benefit analysis simply isn't worth it, and the opportunity cost that we've endured simply is a major mistake. And this weekend shows that the military has had enough of it, and we are here today to talk about the breakdown in the military. As you can imagine, this is a pretty all-encompassing issue. Testimony has already been given this weekend to point out the many reasons the military is breaking, if not broken. And I remember I was actually in Iraq in 2005, and Lieutenant General Hemley got some controversy for saying that he believed that the reserve forces were rapidly degenerating into a broken force. And that was controversial at the time, but he was right then, and he's never been more right than he is now. There are many reasons for this, including what we just heard. Multiple deployments, unclear and completely bogus missions in the first place, a lack of planning, lack of preparation, a lack of direction and purpose while over there, and a lack of support and resources upon returning home. And other factors such as stop loss and a lack of adequate equipment is what I'm here to talk about today. Not to mention the fact that we're fast approaching the 5th year of this mistake and our 4,000 fallen soldiers, service members. That number doesn't even take into account the countless people that have come home with PTSD and other mental illnesses that have taken their own lives or taken other people's lives, as well as the tens or thousands wounded or physically, both physically and mentally. As a unit, we are fortunate enough not to lose soldiers specifically with our unit, but we did lose people that were attached to us and were providing convoy security. However, upon months of our unit returning home, we lost 2 good friends of mine due to mental illness. One was alcohol and one was just reckless behavior. And I know one personally was seeking support, and I imagine since we were both going through the same VA, he was on the same waiting list that I was on at the time, and ironically I'm still on over 2 years of being home. Such a tragedy. In fact, from a VA standpoint, I've already been tossed around to 3 VAs personally. First Houma, Wisconsin, then Iron Mountain, Michigan, and more recently in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And I've yet to be into a VA yet. These long waits and these that are largely due to inadequate funding are definitely responsible for several deaths. Although these names don't always appear on the evening news, and these people don't always die with full military honors or burials. But these are deaths that could have been prevented, as are a lot of other deaths that happened while in theater. For example, when I first arrived in theater in December 2004, our trucks had 0 up-armoring at all. It was right around that time when a brave specialist named Thomas Wilson questioned and criticized Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld about this problem. Our first several missions we didn't have, Our first several missions we didn't have armor at all, or what was affectionately known as hillbilly armor. And that was nothing more than a little thin metal sheet of metal that was literally welded onto the sides of our trucks. It didn't stop bullets. At best, it slowed them down, and definitely slowed our trucks down as well. But once that brave specialist questioned Rumsfeld, within months, we all got armor. But the problem was that we had already been into that war for a couple of years now. So that definitely hurt our morale of our troops, knowing that it took someone like that, took a brave soldier like that to raise that kind of question and to make it into a media story before we realized that we were finally going to get the equipment that we needed. but it definitely hurt our morale knowing that it took something like that for the administration to care about us. And the same could be said about the night vision goggles and so many of the other equipment that we had. The NVGs that we had were a joke. I mean, any of us in this room could walk down the street to any department store, to any sports store, and get better equipment. They ran on AA batteries that usually lasted only a couple hours, and they definitely could have come in handy several times. I can think of specific incidents. For example, when we experienced an ambush outside of Safwan in southern Iraq at night, and we couldn't even see who was shooting at us. And in fact, the trouble it took us to try to adjust our equipment and try to shake it up so the batteries would work actually hurt us more than it helped us. And I'm not ashamed to admit that, instead of trying to fire because I didn't know where I was firing, I was just kind of cowering behind the small armor that I had because you simply couldn't see where your enemy was. And I don't think any American soldier should ever have to endure that kind of problem. But lack of equipment alone isn't the only problem that's going on overseas. Regardless of what the Pentagon may want to claim, I was definitely inadequately trained. Well, I can tell you that I spent several hours in basic training learning how to use a bayonet, which is something that most people haven't used in combat in several decades. Or spent several months in Fort Benning, Georgia prior to deployment learning how to kick down walls and destroy rooms, which is something I personally never had to do. We never received 1 second of cultural training or language training. We encountered Iraqis almost daily on the roads, in the marketplaces, outside of camps and bases, but we had no idea how to interact with them or how to respect them. Instead, while at Fort Benning, we received pep talks from well-paid, hired private contractors who came into our briefing rooms, and they insulted the intelligence of the hundreds of us who enlisted voluntarily to serve our country. I remember like it was yesterday, a chubby white guy came into our room. He was a well-paid contractor and tried telling us that those liberal tree huggers that are saying this war is about oil are so wrong because we're not importing any oil from Iraq at that time. And those of us knew better. I mean, it doesn't take a lot to research that and to realize at the time of invasion we were getting around 10 to 11% of our oil from Iraq. So I'm not saying that's necessarily the only reason we went in, but to have people stand before you while in uniform and lie to you, it's definitely a reason that our morale was hurt, and it's one of the many reasons that lead to the breakdown of the military.